opposition from sinners, so that you will not grow weary or lose heart. A number of years ago, I was on a mission trip. I accompanied our youth group at the time on a mission trip to upstate New York. The purpose of the trip was to provide needed home repairs to those who were unable who did not have the means to pay for them. And our group's task was to replace a roof on a home. And every day before we began work, I was a new pastor at the time, and I really wanted to set myself up as a new wise pastor to the youth. And so every morning before we would start work, I'd ask them a spiritual question. And the question that we kept coming back to, because they never had an answer for it, was, besides coming in on a Sunday morning into a sanctuary and sitting in pews and singing songs, what does church look like for you? Taking that out of the equation. And they could never really think of anything. And then I pressed a little further as the week went on, and I said, what does an authentic expression of church look like to you? What would it mean to really gather and be the church? And they still didn't have an answer. And so I asked every week and said, while you're working, while your hands are busy, think about that question. And I was kind of fishing for an answer, I'll be honest. And I was hoping to work it into the sermon when we returned to church on that Sunday. And the answer I was looking for was that they would connect the expression of faith to somehow serving others with their hands and with the lives that they were living. But when the answer eventually came, and it did, it was just as good, maybe better, and totally valid. So towards the end of the work week, we took the group to a restaurant for dinner as a special treat. And it ended up that our group of 20 or so individuals was the only group in the restaurant. We were the only ones there that night. And so the owners of the restaurant were very accommodating to our rambunctious group that was now very hungry after a day of manual labor. And they acquiesced. They went along with our youth group's request to arrange all of the tables in the restaurant so that right down the middle of the dining room, we all sat together, all 20 of us, at one table, because that's what they wanted. So we were at one long table, and it was a lovely time, and that group got along really well together. And after the food arrived and folks were well into their meals, one of the youth who was down the table quite a ways from me yelled down at me and said, "Pastor Cam, Pastor Cam!" I said, "What?" Your question about what church looks like. This is it. And I think that's an excellent answer. And it's even a historical answer, too. The earliest versions of Christianity in our faith met most often around the table, around food at the table. A lot of the early church gatherings were dinner church, we might say. And if you look around the New Testament, especially, there's way more talk about how to behave around the dinner table than there is about how to behave in church, because that's how church gathered. In the big view of church history, everyone sitting together in pews like we normally do is actually a relatively new phenomenon. I mean, it's several hundred years old, but in the broad scheme of our faith, that's relatively new. Indeed, much of the way that the early church came together was inspired by the events that we are celebrating tonight in Holy Communion, or as Holy Communion. Jesus' last meal together with his closest friends before he died. In our churches, we celebrate it as a holy ritual that we call the sacrament of Holy Communion, which means in a very overall way, something holy and mysterious is happening. That's what a sacrament is. And in our churches, it's this holy ritual. But to Jesus and his disciples on that very first evening where they celebrated what we now know as communion, it would have just been dinner, a normal dinner. These holy elements, we call them, bread and juice, sometimes bread and wine, depending on your tradition. would have been very common at every table. They would have been basic elements for life, basic things that you would eat most every night or every day. And even wine would have been common at the table. A fermented beverage of any kind would have been even more ordinary and plain than water would have been due to sanitary concerns of the age. Water by itself was very special. And eating something that the people, and so we are eating something that, and eating is something that people in all places and in all cultures must do every day, together or apart. So Jesus takes this opportunity to say some parting words to his disciples, to his friends, offering a sacred reminder to an ordinary and daily action. The meal that we call a sacrament, we believe, is a place that we come to meet and eat with God. And through God's Spirit that is among us all the time on earth, especially when we are gathered together, and through God's Spirit, there is a mysterious presence that is a part of our celebration and remembrance. The daily, ordinary thing that we must eat to survive becomes special and extraordinary, nourishment for our souls and our bodies as well. And through this blending of our world with the timeless presence of God, we believe that as we eat this meal together, we are connected with all of the people who have taken it at any time. That there's this blending of this current space that we are in and the eternal heavenly banquet, we call it. That we're all connected by this presence of God when we take a sacrament like this. And the importance of this holy mystery being entangled up with something that we must do on a daily basis, no matter what is going on in our lives, whether it's a table whether it's a dining table at a party, at a special event at a restaurant, whether it's at a repast for a funeral, or just a random Wednesday night. We know that we are deeply connected to God and each other when we share a meal like Jesus and his disciples did. And he invites us to remember the holy and the extraordinary that's in the everyday and the ordinary. So when I step up to this table once a month in the Methodist Church, plus some special occasions like tonight, when I step up to this table and say the words that Jesus said on that first night, and when I sit with my family every evening and eat tacos like we had tonight for dinner at the house, I am connected, and I feel connected with people like my grandfather, who's gone on into life eternal, who so often sat at the head of our family's holiday gatherings. I'm present with the pastor that I've talked about in our sermon on Sunday, who died just a few days after, leading this same sacrament with me on Easter Sunday. I'm dining once again in the restaurant with those youth who discovered something new about what it means to be the church. And I'm connected with each and every one of you. And so we are all connected because we share this tonight. No matter what else comes in our journey together, even if this exact group doesn't ever meet in this exact way again, we are connected. And we have this moment that connects us forever in the presence of God. Just as Jesus reminded his disciples before their darkest days, we go through the journey of life with its depths, its dark, its hard moments, and with its really great and life-giving moments. And so as we prepare to go into the dark places of Holy Week, we take this and share this meal together to remind us of God's presence, even in our lowest of lows, anticipating the highs and excitement of Easter Sunday.